an honor and a privilege for me to present to you the President of the United States.
I don't think there is any more valuable lesson for a president or member of the House and Senate than to fly as we have flown today over some of the bleakest land in the United States, and then to come to a river and see what grows next to it, and come to this city and come to this town and come to this platform and know how vitally important water is. I hope that those of us who hold positions of public responsibility in 1962 are as far-seeing about the needs of this country in 1982 and 1992 as those men and women were 30 years ago who began to make this project possible. What are we going to do in 1962, beginning today, to determine what projects we should develop, so that by the end of this century, when there are 300 million people in the United States, that there will be available to them land and water and light and power and resources and places to live and places to rest and places to work. So we salute this project today, and we salute those who made it possible. And we look to the future, and we look to the past. And we commit ourselves in 1962 not only to celebrate this project, but to move ahead in all the other areas, stretching from California to Cape Cod, Massachusetts, in building this country up. Every member of Congress, everyone in the executive branch, from the President on, in the field of national resources, has to plan during their period of administration or of office for the next generation, because no project that we plan today will be beneficial to us. Anything we begin today is for those who come after us. And just as those who began something years ago make it possible for us to be here, I hope we'll fulfill our responsibility to the next generation that's going to follow us. Those people who come here from abroad, what they want to see is the Tennessee Valley. 10 years from now, they'll want to see this project. And I hope in space and on the ground, this country will continue its march forward. Thank you. Than to come here to South Dakota and realize here in this state and in this country there is being built the largest dam of its kind in the world. It is a source of pleasure to me as president, therefore, to come here on this occasion. When we are inclined to take these wonders for granted, let us remember that only a generation or two ago, all the great rivers of America, the Missouri, the Columbia, the Mississippi, the Tennessee, ran to the sea unharnessed and unchecked. Their power potential was wasted. Their economic benefits were sparse, and their flooding caused an appalling destruction of life and of property.
He'll deliver his message at the Mormon Tabernacle in Salt Lake City, an institution universally known for the music of its great choir.
comes 15 or 20 inches a year. This state knows that the control of water is the secret of the development of the West. And whether we use it for power or for irrigation or for whatever purpose, no drop of water west of the 100th parallel should flow to the ocean without being used. And to do that requires the dedicated commitment of the people of the states of the West, working with the people of all the United States who have such an important equity in the richness of this part of the country. We will triple the population of this country in the short space of 60 or 70 years. And we want those who come after us to have the same rich inheritance that we find now in the United States. And I see the closest interrelationship between the strength of the United States here at home and the strength of the United States around the world. There is one great natural development here in the United States which has had in its own way a greater effect upon the position and influence and prestige of the United States almost than any other act we've done. You know what it is? It's the Tennessee Valley. Nearly every leader of every new emerging country that comes to the United States wants to go to New York, to Washington, and the Tennessee Valley, because they want to see what we were able to do with the most poverty-ridden section of the United States in the short space of 30 years by the wise management of our resources. What happens here in this country affects the security of the United States and the cause of freedom around the world.
As I move through the West, and especially in this state and the other states where water is short, I realize that nearly all of the standard of living which we enjoy in this part of the United States has been due partly to our own efforts, the generation which is now here, but really even more to the generation that went before. The people who started in the early 1920s, for example, to organize the distribution of water along the basin. The people who began to talk many years ago about what we're now putting into practice. So water is the key. The management of water, I think, is the key that will open a very bright future. You will only perceive it very slightly in the next few years. But those who come after you, they'll know it, and they'll remember with appreciation. I'm particularly glad because Senator Morse has preached the doctrine of the wise use of water with, I think, more vigor almost than any member of the United States Senate. He's chairman of the subcommittee on irrigation and reclamation. He learned this lesson the hard way, as anyone must who lives here. I come from a section of the country where we waste water, where we seek ways to get rid of it, where we seek to have it go to the ocean as quickly as possible. It's just the reverse here. And therefore, those of us who come from a section where water is in surplus, I think it's valuable for us to come and feel that hot sun and fly over this country and see only on occasion where there are water resources, and then realize how important this project is. But the important thing to remember is for 50 years, men have been talking about this project. It's now a reality. What are we going to do now so that 50 years from now, the people who live in Utah and the United States will feel that in the early 60s, we made the proper decision for the management of our resources. So this is going to make a profound difference to this state. It stands in the finest tradition of federal-state cooperation, public and private coordination. This is going to be a tremendous blessing.
The Calgary Herald, Wednesday, March 18, 1964. A 500-mile-long water reservoir in Banff and Jasper, and a canal system through Alberta linking the prairies with the Great Lakes are two segments of a mammoth project envisioned by a U.S. engineering and construction company. Scope of the project calls for establishment of an international governing body from Canada, U.S., and Mexico. The Parsons Company suggests it might be called the North American Water and Power Alliance. It would take 30 years and 4 million new Friday, March 20th, 1964. An imaginative proposal has just been announced to develop North American water resources on the massive scale that today's growing water needs demand in half that time, at an estimated cost, including financing, of $100 billion. Davis, parliamentary assistant to Canada's Prime Minister Lester B. Pearson, recently said in an interview, "I'm convinced that in the long term, it would all Samuel be in Canada's Nelson, interest." General Manager and Chief Engineer of the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, believes it should be carefully studied. Los Angeles Times, Sunday, March 22, 1964. Is visionary planning the answer to the West's endless struggle to find more water for its growing cities? Experts are puzzling over that question in the light of a new master plan to tap streams and Alaska system of canals, aqueducts, and dams would take 100,000 workers 30 years. Washington, D.C. Post-Times Herald, May 2, 1964. The Senate Public Works Committee has set up a special subcommittee under the chairmanship of Senator Frank E. Moss of Utah to study its engineering feasibility. Construction of the project would provide, directly and indirectly, an idle dream or a fantastic pork barrel requiring virtually an endless flow of federal tax dollars? The Senate Public Works Committee, headed by Michigan Senator Pat McNamara, doesn't think so. Neither does Senator Frank Moss, whose special subcommittee is scheduled to make a preliminary feasibility report to the full committee in about 6 months. The Senate Public Works Committee has nearly completed an engineering feasibility study of the $100 billion Parsons Plan. If the Senate subcommittee's present studies indicate feasibility of the project, the U.S. will probably ask to have the matter placed in the hands of the International Joint Commission. September 15, 1964. The plans of Minister of Parliament Jack Davis for the diversion of northern waters to central Canada and the United States are passing the stage of imaginative conception to that of practical consideration. The conception is magnificent. By all known facts about the Water and Power Alliance concept, the directors of the Western Canada Reclamation Association will forward a resolution to the federal government, urging a full investigation of the proposal. The meeting has had North America-wide publicity. February 22, 1965. What do you call a plan that would divert 36 trillion gallons of water annually from Alaska and northern Canada southward to 33 U.S. states, 7 Canadian provinces, and 3 Mexican states? That would irrigate 40 million acres of land in 17 western states, more than is currently being irrigated. That would yield 100 million kilowatts of electricity, equivalent to 75 Hoover dams? You call it Nawapa, the North American Water and Power Alliance. That's what. And for $80 billion spent over a period of 30 years, Nawapa would be the greatest...
July 20th, 1965. Mr. K.D. McFarland, Manager of Public Relations, Ralph M. Parsons Company. Dear Ken, I enjoyed the visit that I had with you and Mr. Parsons while we waited to see the Vice President. I'm glad that we did have a brief chat with him. As you can see, his time's always overfilled, and it is hard to break in for a visit of any length. However, he was happy to see you, and has mentioned to me since we returned to Washington that he was glad to get acquainted with Mr. Parsons, and he was looking forward to the material on the Nawapa project. 5 of us from the Congress met at lunch last week and decided to open correspondence and communication with some of the Canadian parliamentarians that we met in Ottawa earlier in the year. I'll let you know if anything grows out of this effort. Sincerely, Frank Moss. August 12, 1965. The President, the White House, Washington, D.C. Dear Mr. President, I have been honored to be invited twice during the past week to witness the signing of bills dealing with our water resources. The River Basin Planning Bill and the Saline Water Conversion Water Bill are both landmarks along the way in meeting a problem that is pressing down on us more severely every day. As you know, I wholeheartedly supported both of these bills and believe that we need to increase our efforts in these areas. I do believe there is another area that's not getting its full attention yet, and I would like to have an opportunity to talk with you about it, or better still, have a chance to bring along a colored film which I have available to show you the concept of bringing large amounts of fresh, pure water from Alaska and northern Canada down through the entire United States and on to Old Mexico. This plan's called Nawapa. Although I've mentioned this to you in offhand conversations, I realize that your time is at such a premium that you have had no opportunity to make further inquiry about it, and I've hesitated to press for time to discuss it with you because of the many, many other things that you have to command your time and attention. If, however, you could arrange a time of 30 minutes or so, I would like to come down and bring with me George Mahon, Sid Yates, and Biz Johnson from the House, Clint Anderson, Tommy Kuchik from the Senate, perhaps 2 or 3 other people. Just take time to see the film and to explain to you the concept of this idea, maybe discuss very briefly what could and should be done to move along on bringing the concept to a concrete plan. Would you please send word if this is possible? Sincerely, Frank Moss.
This motion picture is about the North American Water and Power Alliance, Nawapa. Nawapa has been conceived as one possible solution to help the collection and distribution segments of the overall continental water management problem. In terms of water, power, flood control, transportation, and recreational facilities, more than 33 of the states would directly benefit. In Canada, 7 provinces and 1 territory would directly benefit, as would regions in northern Mexico. For example, some areas are at the mercy of too much water, while others suffer from lack of sufficient supplies. And in other regions still, the priceless resource pours unused and wasted into the sea. The shortage of water supplies is not a local problem. It is a continental problem. In overall planning by the Ralph M. Parsons Company, the Nawapa concept takes advantage of the geographical and climatological factors of our continent. Only water which is surplus now or in the foreseeable...
September 3rd, 1965. Dear colleague, I am writing to call your attention to a resolution I have introduced, Senate Concurrent Resolution 55, which provides it to be the sense of Congress that the President refer to the International Joint Commission, the subject of the North American Water and Power Alliance, with instructions that it be fully studied and that a detailed engineering survey be conducted on it. The resolution will be on the desk for co-sponsorship through Wednesday, September 8th. Sincerely, Frank Moss.
Dear Ted, acknowledging your good note of September 3rd, I am confident I would vote with you on your resolution. With every good wish, sincerely, Stuart Symington,
Dear Ted,
Senator,
Missouri.
It
will be a pleasure to join you as a co-sponsor on this resolution, which covers the subject so vitally important to this hemisphere. My commendations to you for the excellent work you are doing in regards to this project. Sincerely, Paul Fannin, United States.
The possibility of developing a water supply in the North for use in the United States should be of concern to all of us. Sincerely, Mike Monroney, Senator, Oklahoma.
September 8, 1965. Dear Ted, I'm glad to join you as a co-sponsor of Senate Concurrent Resolution 55, expressing the sense of Congress that the President refer to the International Joint Commission the subject of the North American Water and Power Alliance. My staff has informed Ms. Rischel of my desire to join you on this measure. This proposal deserves careful study and consideration by both the United States and Canada, and has applications to the East as well as the West. Sincerely, Robert F. Kennedy, U.S. Senate, New York.
New York Times, September 12, 1965. A far-reaching new plan for diverting huge water masses has caught the attention of Congress and has enlisted the support of a highly influential group of American industrial and financial leaders. Senator Moss took the first steps earlier this month to start such a study when he introduced a resolution requesting that the study be undertaken by the meeting, when he said recently, there was a general agreement that the Nawapa project was essential if our economic growth and standard of living. The question that emerged from the meeting was not whether Nawapa should be undertaken, but rather how it would be completed.
September 18th, 1965. Dear Senator Moss, since your speech on the water diversion from northern Canada to the United States, we have developed a rash of would-be patriots, that is, editorial writers, two-bit politicians, etc., who are very much against it. Their reasons expressed are as varied as the colors of the rainbow, when in reality, they just don't want progress. Personally, I am in favor of such an undertaking, and there are millions of other Canadians who feel the same way, but are lackadaisical in their methods of expressing their feelings. During various discussions on the subject, the opponents say, if we give the water to the USA, how will we ever get it back? And my reply to this is, how do we get it back from the Arctic Ocean? Respectfully yours,
September
Ed
23rd,
Negrich,
1965.
Scarborough, Ontario.
Dear Senator Moss, I have read with enthusiasm the recent New York Times article regarding plans for controlled water use throughout most of North America. The map accompanying it did not take in my part of the country about whose water problems I have been thinking and working. One point they should bear in mind is that, according to the Atomic Energy Commission, tunnels can be constructed by underground atomic explosions at 1/10 the cost of conventional methods. As a lawyer and economist, I believe I could be useful in many ways in making this project a reality, and hope you can suggest some way in which my services can be used. I also might be able to help in Ottawa, since I have corresponded on international matters with Prime Minister Lester Pearson for many years. Please tell me what I can do to help this very constructive effort. Respectfully yours, Frederick C. Smedley, New York.
My dear Senator Moss, recently my attention was drawn to an advertisement of the Ralph M. Parsons Company on Nawapa. This letter is just to tell you that I am immensely interested in this plan, which strikes me as meritorious indeed. Speaking as an engineer, I am enticed by the scope of Nawapa and by the magnificence of the concept. I wish your committee all success in its mission, which is truly in the national interest. Sincerely yours, A.M. Gaudin, Richards Professor of Mineral Engineering, Massachusetts Institute of Technology.
October 1st, 1965. Dear Mr. Smedley, I certainly appreciate your letter of September 29th concerning my Nawapa resolution. The measure is now before the Senate Public Works Committee, of which I'm a member, but no further action has been taken yet. I am, however, most encouraged at the interest which has developed in various circles. It's most thoughtful of you to offer your assistance.
Dear Senator Moss, I would like to mention that, in my opinion, by next February 1966, a restricted semi-official meeting be arranged in Montreal between our government representatives. I hope you were not put off by various speakers who lately have attacked the Nawapa project. I hope this will be useful for future deliberations. I am seeing the Honorable Alvin Hamilton tomorrow, and knowing that he met you in Ottawa, it will be interesting to obtain his reaction. With kindest regards, I remain yours sincerely, Jean Bourguignon.
Dear colleague, I believe you will be interested in a letter, copy attached, which I've just received from the Executive Secretary of the Montreal Port Council. I strongly endorse his suggestion that a restricted, semi-official meeting be held by next February. As you know, I have long believed that discussions should be held between Canadian and United States officials on this significant question. I'd be most interested in your reaction to Mr. Bourguignon's letter.
Dear Ted,
Sincerely,
I am all in favor of any meeting that will help to solve our local, national, and international water problems. And so a meeting of the kind that Mr. Bourguignon suggests would certainly be desirable. With warm regards, I remain cordially yours, Ernest Gruning, U.S. Senator,
Diverting
Alaska.
Arctic water to Western Canada, the United States, and Mexico. I certainly support such discussions. The sooner we can begin talks and arrange for negotiations, the better. Our water supply problems are going to become geometrically more acute. I would hope that this question could receive prompt attention and not be unduly delayed. With best regards, and aloha. Sincerely yours, Hiram Fong, Senator.
United States officials on the question of development of water resources. Needless to say, I'll be very pleased to cooperate with you fully. With kindest regards, sincerely yours, Sidney R. Yates, Member of Congress from Illinois.
October 12, 1965. Mr. Kenneth McFarland, Director of Public Relations, Ralph M. Parsons Company. Dear Ken, as I mentioned to you, I was on a long-wire radio panel this weekend for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, along with Ray Williston, Minister of Lands and Forests and Water Resources for British Columbia. One of the questions of the moderator put Williston on the hot seat. He said, since the British Columbia government exports oil and gas and lumber, how can it justify the statement of the Prime Minister for British Columbia that water is a resource which should never be exported? Williston, of course, could not distinguish as to why export of petroleum in return for monetary compensation is any different than export of water. I pointed out also that water is a renewable resource, and the petroleum is one that is
concerned about the water resources. Have you given any thought to this?
The United States is finding that water is one of its most valuable and becoming one of its scarcest resources. And we have lots of water. Now, we have to be careful and not to alienate this great resource without taking care of our own needs. We will be discussing this with the United States, who are very anxious to work out arrangements by which some of our water resources are moved down south. This can be one of the most important developments in our history.
October 18, 1965. On September 1st, Senator Moss introduced Senate Concurrent Resolution 55 and made an extensive address to the Senate at that time in support of the resolution. On September 7th, Representative David S. King introduced an identical resolution in the House as House Concurrent Resolution 488. The Board of Trustees of the Northwest Public Power Association adopted a resolution in
October
support
20th,
of the proposal.
1965. Dear Senator Moss, how does it look for getting Senate Concurrent Resolution 55 adopted before this session adjourns? How about White House backing? Sincerely, Fred Smedley. November 3rd, 1965. Dear Senator, while your desire to move ahead with international discussions and studies is understandable, it appears, at least at this time, that we would not be prepared to do so by next February. Sincerely, Lee C. White, Special Counsel.
Dear Senator Moss, we do not doubt that it will eventually be necessary to study and develop projects such as the Nawapa if we are to meet the growing water requirements of the North American continent. However, before doing this, we believe it essential that a more complete study of our own resources be made. Sincerely yours, Stuart Udall, Secretary of...
Dear Senator, the possibility of discussions with the Canadian government in the future should not be ruled out, but I am sure you will agree that the timing of such discussions is very important. If and when it is appropriate and desirable to discuss these problems with Canada, we will certainly do so. Sincerely, Lee C. White, Special Counsel to the President.
Just 6 days ago, the people of America were jolted by an announcement. Our casualties in Vietnam in a single week had exceeded the average weekly rate of dead and wounded in the Korean War. 240 Americans killed, 470 wounded. If the American public had not known until then, they know now. The United States is indeed at war, a full-dress war against a formidable enemy. Most of these casualties were suffered in the Battle of Yadrang Valley, the biggest, the costliest, the most significant yet fought by American troops in Vietnam.
Nearly 10 bombing missions an hour round the clock, and still they came, the communists determined that Plei May must fall. With their backs to their main supply depot, 3 regiments of PAVN, North Vietnamese regulars, were waiting behind fortified bunkers. For 4 hours, the enemy poured mortar rounds into the landing zones, but the cavalry stood its ground. For the first time in the Vietnam War, American unit casualties were described as moderate. Most of the casualties were taken at night. The medevac helicopters came in blackness under fire. Captain Guy Kimsey was one of the pilots.
January 11th, 1966. Dear Ken, I look forward to hearing from Mr. Parsons and hope that I can be on hand when he presents the Nawapa concept to the President. Congress is underway, and I expect we are going to have a fairly tough session this year with the Vietnam War. However, I hope we can make some real headway on our Nawapa program.
February
Sincerely,
3rd, 1966. Dear Mr. Senator, I read with great interest recently your comment in connection with the multi-billion-dollar water plan, which has important implications so far as Canada is concerned. I am president of the Prairie Flood Control Organization. We are planning our annual meeting at the present time, and it seems to me that this would be a wonderful opportunity for you to bring us your message. If you come to speak to us, we shall plan to have representatives of the provincial governments of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. I shall be awaiting with keen interest your reply. Respectfully yours, H.L. Henderson, Mayor.
February 28,
Portage-la-Prairie,
1966.
Manitoba.
The Honorable A.N. McLean, the Senate, Ottawa, Canada. My dear Senator McLean, you recall that we met in Ottawa last year when I presented the Nawapa concept at the interparliamentary meeting. I can say that I consider a diversion of Arctic water to be the best hope to supply the deficiency in the Great Lakes, and which now limits the developments of the western regions of our 2 nations. I look forward with great interest to discussing this question further with you. I'd be very pleased to hear from you. Sincerely, Frank Moss.
Mr. Grant Midgley, Office of Senator Frank Moss, March 15th, 1966. Dear Mr. Midgley, it was a pleasure to meet with you recently in Washington and to hear of Senator Moss's progress with regard to Nawapa. I have subsequently read with great interest the Senator's remarks in the Congressional Record of February 4th, 1966. I thought that the Senator's statement should be brought to the attention of a number of people across Canada who are directly concerned with water resources. Would it be possible, therefore, to obtain 100 copies of this statement for redistribution through our office? Yours sincerely, George Francis, Canadian Council of Resource Ministers.
1966. Dear Senator Moss, we continue to receive all sorts of information of activity in Canada. As you probably know, Ned gave 2 presentations at Winnipeg on the 24th and 25th, and I gave a talk to the Northern Resources Conference in Whitehorse, Yukon on the 24th. All of these presentations were well received, and I think we're picking up a lot of support from technical people, which is not readily apparent in the press. We're also receiving, here in Los Angeles, an increasing number of visitors from Canada who are interested in looking at Nawapa objectively. I think all these signs are encouraging. Best personal regards, very truly yours, Kenton D. McFarland, Manager of Public Relations, the Ralph M. Parsons Company, Los Angeles.
Los Angeles, California. Dear Mr. Parsons, quite some time ago I learned that you intended to present to President Johnson an animated display of the Nawapa concept, which comes in sort of a briefcase. I was most pleased that you planned to do this. I understand that President Johnson had discussed the Nawapa concept briefly when you were a guest at dinner at the White House. The President, of course, is intensely interested in water development, but he does not, I fear, know the details of the Nawapa concept. The President is planning now to call a worldwide water conference in Washington next year. It's going to be called Water for Peace. And by that time, we certainly should have before him the most promising and imaginative scheme of Nawapa. There is a continuing, growing interest in this great idea. Sincerely, Frank Moss.
July 12th, 1966. Dear Senator Moss, I have read your statesmanly address given in Quebec with great interest and profit. Your ideas were excellently set down, and with such diplomacy that it would seem to me that little ill feeling or distress could result in this long-range program if the people in Canada had an opportunity to become acquainted with your thinking. I wish to commend you for this address. Sincerely, Daniel K. Inouye, United States Senator, Hawaii.
The concept for a North American Water and Power Alliance has brought us up squarely to a point where we must prepare for the moment of decision which is surely coming. If anyone thinks this is but an engineer's pipe dream that will vanish with the pipe smoke, he is mistaken. In the United States, the federal and state governments and individuals who have a knowledge of water are considering the Nawapa concept very seriously. The United States Senate thinks it's so important that the chairman of the Senate Committee on Public Works established a subcommittee on Western water development to study the Nawapa proposals. American Statesman, Austin, Texas, October 9, 1966. Despite the objectors, there are some signs that Nawapa may be edging closer to serious study. President Johnson met Ralph Parsons at a businessman's luncheon at the White House and has asked him back to discuss the project. The President likes Texas-sized plans, and it is clearly possible that he could recast Nawapa as an administration project, if and when the Vietnam War is settled.
They're poor to be lifted up, and their cities to be built, and there's a world to be helped. Yet, we do what we must.
It was pretty bad to listen to your friends crying out for help, not being able to do a thing. We just couldn't do anything. We were all pinned down. And,
Are you writing home about it just now?
Yes, I'm writing my father right now.
February 20th, 1967. The Honorable Tom McCall, Governor of Oregon. Dear Governor McCall, I was delighted to read in the Christian Science Monitor of February 18th that you had endorsed the Nawapa plan to bring water from Alaska and Canada southward into the United States. Your action in completing a water survey in Oregon is the thing that must be done by all of our states, and indeed by all the provinces of Canada so that we have specifics to talk about. We do know, however, that vast amounts of fresh water flow unused into the northern Pacific and Arctic Oceans, and that this water could be utilized rather than totally wasted. Sincerely, Frank
Senator
Moss.
It was exciting to get a letter of approbation from Nawapa's #1 champion. Considerable research, including an aerial tour of the Columbia Basin on both sides of the border, has caused me to lean towards this awesome concept. I'm looking forward to completion of the water studies so that negotiations can begin in earnest on this urgent problem. Kindest personal regards, sincerely, Tom McCall, Governor of Oregon.
300 to 400 meters southeast of the country. Okay, we got income.
I think we're just occupying ground and losing too many men. I'm losing too many men. If we were to stay here too much longer, we wouldn't have much left of this platoon, let alone the company.
The rifles have been jamming, the mud's been, has slowed everything down, and the artillery comes in everywhere, and it just gets pretty futile and frustrating.
The military can no longer justify this war with a casualty count. It may be that more Marines are dying along the DMZ than enemy. Anyway, no one doubts General Giap's strategy of sacrificing 10 of his own for 1 American, and few here believe our own exaggerated guesses at enemy casualties. You begin to suspect that we've reached the limits of our present strategy when the generals are talking openly about an invasion of the North, and the men around Conchen are talking about the need for tactical nuclear weapons.
September 9th, 1967. Dear Senator Moss, when the time comes that our government is to take active proceedings on Nawapa, I would like to offer my services in advance in some type of executive capacity. I have just returned from Ottawa, where I was visiting my friend, the recently retired Assistant Deputy Minister of Defense, Jim Sharp, with whom I have been keeping in touch on Nawapa as an indirect promotion for some years. Jim tells me he recently discussed it with the Minister of Mines and Resources, and that the latter is very favorable toward it and trying to drum up support. Jim says, in general, the Canadian people now are quite for it, and the general belief in Ottawa seems to be that it is the U.S. government that is dragging its feet, rather than Canada. I believe, at least privately, Bennett of British Columbia is now admitting it would be a good thing. Sincerely, J.P. Neal,
14,
Systems Consulting Engineer, Mountain
Dear
View,
Mr. Neal,
California.
I appreciate your comments about the interest of the retired Assistant Deputy Minister of Defense and his report that many in Canada are now fully in support of the Nawapa concept. There may be some substance to their saying that in America we are dragging our feet on this matter. I haven't been able to get any sort of action in the past several months. But with the encouragement of your report, perhaps we can get busy once again and see if we can move towards some hearings and perhaps open formal conversation with the Canadians on the water from the north. Sincerely,
December 29,
Frank Moss.
1967. Dear Mr. Strachan, we were pleased to receive your recent query concerning our North American Water and Power Alliance concept. We appreciate your interest. One of the points I would like to make is that Nawapa is more important right now as a symbol than it is as a specific map routing of a water transfer and distribution system. It is a symbol of total water management. It embraces the things we need to do to preserve and extend the water resources of the continent. Nawapa's primary significance is that it represents the first time the continent has been looked at as a whole with regard to the water resources. Best wishes for a prosperous and rewarding 1968. Very truly yours, K.D. McFarland.
Columns of smoke rose skywards as block after block in the capital city burned with the fires of Viet Cong treachery.
dedicated his life to love and to justice between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort. My favorite poet was Aeschylus. He once wrote, "Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God."
That's the name representing the student body, but in fact it's a steering committee of various people from the campus. And we're now trying to combat a faculty statement to the effect that no amnesty will be granted to students under any
establish a free, open, democratic, and meaningful discourse between faculty and students that put an end to the old system and structure of Columbia University. Classes are being held on lawn, on campus.
Under his signature, to shoot to kill any arsonist or anyone with a Molotov cocktail in their hand in Chicago, to fire a building because they're potential murderers, and to issue a police order to shoot, to maim, or cripple anyone looting any stores in our city.
April 24th, 1970. Dear Senator Moss, we recently read that you feel Canada should not hoard her water, that indeed she has a moral obligation to share this abundance. And you say, if the United States population growth rate keeps on the way it's going, we're in for some privation in some areas if we can't get some of that water. Morality has nothing to do with it. And what we want to know is, why aren't you doing something about this population growth? Are we just going to keep growing and growing so we can gobble the whole world's resources? Why is everyone complaining about our environmental problems and no one admitting what the real cause of the ailment is? Sincerely, Mrs. Ann Stevens,
May 8th,
La Crescenta,
1970.
California.
Dear Senator Moss, there is no essential reason why the population of the western states should continue to increase at the rates projected. If there are inadequate resources of water or anything else to support these people, then that growth should be restricted. Sincerely, Ronald Seal, University of Windsor, Windsor, Ontario, Canada.
Dear Senator Moss, in Canada,
Some progress has been made in dispelling the myth that unused water is wasted water. Evidently, progress in the United States has been slower. The seemingly unused and hence wasted fresh water flowing into the Arctic is in fact of considerable importance to the Canadian environment and perhaps to North America as a whole. The fact that it is not directly used by human society simply means that it is free to continue to perform its vital functions. Functions that have been conducted since the last ice age more than 10,000 years ago. I hope you will think very deeply on these things, Senator Moss, before lightly advocating the diversion and destruction of northern water systems to meet short-term needs that really stem from our genius for mismanagement and environmental destruction. Sincerely, D.A. Chand, Professor and Chairman of the Department of
April 27th, 1971. Dear Senator Moss, we are presently studying the North American Water and Power Alliance in our graduate course, Water Resources Engineering at San Jose State College. What is the present status of Nawapa in the federal government? Sincerely, Gerald E.
That we must assure ourselves that our fertile soil supplying us with food will not be rendered impotent due to a lack of vital water. Implementation of this project also offers a solution to the national crisis of unemployment, particularly aerospace people. I sincerely hope that this letter will serve to remind you of the increasing necessity of this project for our survival. Sincerely, Raymond Elmer Webster.
There is a tremendous opportunity here for Canadians to drop their sectional bickering and become united in a common cause by working together for their mutual provincial benefits in this gigantic undertaking. It would provide many jobs which Canada very much needs. Yours very truly, H.R. Dancy.
Dear Senator Moss, I've followed with considerable interest and satisfaction your enthusiastic efforts related to the long-range development of our North American water resources. If we are going to have more people, we are going to need more water. Our population is increasing, and arable farmland is decreasing, with orchards and farmland daily being converted to housing developments. The once mighty Colorado River, which runs through our state, just doesn't have enough water for the demand of the western states, and we are now squabbling over its use. I again express my appreciation to you and your efforts on water resources.
January 10th, 1973. Mr. Philip Rifkin, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Dear Mr. Rifkin, I have your letter suggesting some adjustments in the Nawapa plan. I am no longer chairman of the subcommittee on public works which considered the Nawapa proposal. That subcommittee is not in existence now. A number of years ago, I introduced a bill to provide for a feasibility report on Nawapa. No action was taken on it, and it has not been reintroduced. The project has not received any attention in the past few years, and I don't know whether interest in it can be revived. Sincerely, Frank Moss.